Good to go? All right. Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for being here at the new Linden Community Center. Talking to folks coming in, if you haven't been able to take a tour and see this amazing facility serving an amazing community, I hope you get that opportunity to do so. It's been almost a year since Council stood before you as a body in person. And even though Councilmember Tyson is unable to be with us this morning, she is certainly here in spirit. As we get ready to return to in-person council meetings in City Hall, the members and I wanted to take a specific stand today to show we are united around a common goal: to make this city safer. If you told us back in March of last year where this city would be today, well, many of us would have laughed. But the reality isn't funny. We're trying to come out of a compound crisis, and as we are starting to recover from COVID, the fact is not everyone is recovering, and people do not feel safe. We've seen people give up on institutions, on their responsibility to the common good, on hope, and they are lashing out violently in some of our neighborhoods. While we have the technology to create vaccines for COVID-19, distrust has kept millions of Ohioans away from the shot that protects us all. And others are simply just breaking the laws they no longer respect. The economic collapse that hit too many families during COVID, the isolation and the depression, they turned to violence to solve their problems, and that is unacceptable. I will never give up on the common good, or our city, or my hope for a better Columbus. We are standing here today to represent the city that we love and to ask our neighbors to keep with us as we work to fix this. We must organize, we must reform our systems, and we absolutely must link arms to stop the violence. For there is no return to normal if we can't stop the killings plaguing neighborhoods and shooting down our children in our streets. There is no return to normal if we don't stand up to the irresponsible behavior of a few. Black folks, white folks, people of all colors, we must all be working together to solve problems. We must reconcile our past. We must take responsibility for our mistakes and commit to common sense solutions. Today, Council offers next steps on a long path towards progress, our third phase of reimagining public safety. I admit it's just a step, but it's one we must take together. Everyone has heard me talk about City Hall, that it's the people's house. We are the people's house. And from my Kroger caucus and my church, from my colleagues here today, and the people who stop us on the streets to talk, we've been listening to people's dreams and their frustrations. But there's a truth that there's been more anger than praise in the last year. And I get that, but we need to keep on marching. Just 2 weeks ago, I sat down at the police academy to talk to recruits who are about to graduate. And while I know a lot of folks don't trust the police right now, I am telling you these recruits are ready to serve you. They are ready for reform. They are ready to do whatever it takes to make Columbus safer. But they also need our residents to give them the space to do their jobs and to speak up if you have information on any of these senseless killings. Today, we will talk about how the city can empower our residents and officers to truly redefine public safety in the short term and in the long term. That is what reimagining public safety is all about. We are working through a once-in-a-century disease, so no, it won't be easy. But during this year, we also started to come to terms with 4 centuries of racial injustice in the wake of the murder of George Floyd. And even if it's hard, I believe that this city has the guts to get through it. This is the only way that it gets better for everyone. These are a few things that I know for sure: that violence is on the rise. There is no higher priority for the City of Columbus and my colleagues in front of you than the safety of our neighbors. Working with the mayor, we've already advanced more than $10 million to community organizations for programs to help prevent violence and to keep our kids busy. From summer jobs for teens, workforce training, summer camps for kids, arts programs to keep kids safe and off the streets. And I expect to see $10 million more in programs like these that will be passed in our work with Mayor Ginther's team. But we also know that there is no silver bullet when it comes to safety. We also need our Division of Police to deeply engage again in the community policing that works. Last night, I sat with officers in a neighbor's backyard on the hilltop. We talked about a house on their street, the drug deals that are happening there, the domestic violence, and we talked about how the city attorney's zone initiative is working with police and neighbors to build a case against a dangerous property. And as the rain poured down at the end of our meeting, I thought that this was a perfect example of community engagement and neighborhood policing. The residents and the police, they were 100% committed to the job, to the neighborhood, and to saving lives. The second thing that is clear to me is that police reform must continue. In the wake of the protest here and across the nation, Council put forth the first phase of reforms. Council restricted no-knock warrants. We asked residents to vote on the creation of a civilian police review board. We prohibited hate group affiliation among police officers, and we began the process of demilitarization of the Division of Police. But policy isn't always enough. Our city was emotionally devastated by the killings of Andre Hill and Ma'Khia Bryant. Life and death decisions happen in seconds, and there's no bringing back either person. So we mourn with their families, and we commit to doing better. But this is the proof of how critical it is to give our officers the best, ongoing training and changing policies when we see that they don't work. As one part of that mission to do better, we are now in the midst of a pilot program to deploy alternative crisis response teams to the 911 call centers and certain calls, allowing our residents to receive the response suited to their needs and letting officers focus on violent crime. Firefighters working with social workers and police officers, and we know it works. This program has already started to have results and was truly helpful to a family friend of mine recently because they de-escalated a situation before it became violent. The third thing that is clear to me is that it's time to start honest talks about reconciliation between police and Black folks. There are countless officers on the streets every day trying to help folks through what is likely one of their worst days, a car crash, instances of domestic violence, losing a child. It is also clear that too many residents have been pulled over, searched, humiliated, sometimes arrested and hurt because of the color of their skin. Reform isn't about being anti-police. It's about creating a trustworthy public safety system that keeps us all safe, officers and residents of all races. When I visited the Academy a few weeks ago, I was proud to sit with one of the most diverse classes in years. I listened to their stories. They know what they're walking into. They don't think our department is perfect, and they want to make it better by their presence. We need to give them the tools and the training and the trust to be the best. This past Monday, Chief Bryant visited Council. She doesn't look like any chief we've had in the past because she's not any chief that we've had in the past. Just like Council believes in reform, she believes in reform. We also have to give her the powers to do her job and the grace to understand that it won't be perfect. Today, I stand with my members to announce a mix of ideas that are moving forward in 2021. Some have been in preparation for a year, some are new, but all of them are steps to making us safer. City Council is the people's house. It is our job to listen to these ideas that came from listening, not only to the people at Kroger's and our protesters that took the streets, but from national experts, from federal Judge Marbley, and the experts at OSU who studied our response to last year's protest. 4,000 residents responded to our surveys last year, and we hosted 22 hours of public hearings. Our residents get it. We can reform, we can change, and we can do it while police do their jobs to keep people safe. A lot of people are scared right now as we face unprecedented violence racking our city. I'll be ready to stand with community leaders and safety officials to do whatever it is necessary to stop these senseless killings. We will do it while trying to bridge the gaps between residents and the police. We can train our officers and hold them accountable. We can build trust while enforcing the law. We can get shooters off the streets while protecting the rights of our citizens, because a progressive city is a safe city. This is our third phase of reimagining public safety, but it is not the last. We will pass some of these ordinances in July, and others will take the rest of the year to discuss, but we will be moving forward. With that, I'd like to invite the Safety Chair, Mitchell J. Brown, to the podium. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank the Council President and my Council colleagues for convening today's press conference. As our community continues to deal with the fallout from COVID-19 pandemic, public safety must remain the Council's top priority. Our community is grappling with the significant violent crime, illegal ATV races on our city streets, and a record number of overdose deaths. As we address these issues, collaboration with the Department of Public Safety and the Divisions of Police and Fire is paramount to our success. Last week, as the Council President has already announced, a new police chief, Elaine Bryant. I look forward to working with her to ensure our officers have the resources and support they need to continue to do a dangerous and challenging job. However, we cannot simply rely on public safety forces to address the complex issues that face our city. Today, I will share some of the action steps my colleagues and I are taking to assist our first responders. First, I'd like to start by acknowledging the toll gun violence has had in this community. Too many in our community have seen their lives cut short or altered forever by this senseless violence. We've also seen too many young people gain access to firearms and make decisions that they will ultimately regret. Just last week, an 11-year-old boy was critically injured by a 14-year-old family member who was playing with a parent's gun. While my prayers are with the child's family, I cannot help but think that this tragedy could have been avoided with the safe storage of that firearm. We must love our children by locking our guns. This is why I've partnered with the Division of Fire to provide free access to gun locks at all Columbus fire stations starting next week. I implore parents with firearms in their home to visit their nearest fire station and ask for a gun lock. Please take these necessary steps to protect your family. In addition, my office is exploring other methods to reduce access to dangerous firearms that can save lives, such as a gun buyback program and continuation of the Citizens Responder Program, Save a Life, Don't Take a Life, that provides training, life-saving training, to our youth. This violence is unacceptable in our city, and we must work together to bring an end to this trauma and grief. Another area of concern, and certainly unacceptable, is the trend these past few months is the emergence of all-terrain vehicles and four-wheel races on our city streets. Residents from across the city have raised legitimate concerns about how these illegal vehicles have impacted the quality of life. While the Division of Police has ramped up enforcement and has continued to develop innovative ways to address these dangerous activities safely, this problem has grown and will require considerable consideration of more significant measures that I will continue to work collaboratively with the Division of Police, the City Attorney Zach Klein, and Mayor Andrew Ginther in the coming weeks to ensure our officers have the resources and support they need to tackle this issue. Third, the COVID-19 pandemic continues to impact our most vulnerable neighbors and their residents, leading to increases in the property crime and solicitation in our communities. Residents have demanded that this council do something to curb this activity in their neighborhoods. On Monday, I introduced legislation to amend our solicitation code with new provisions regarding human trafficking and sexual exploitation, and to ensure that the buyers of sex receive appropriate penalties. My colleagues and I will be investing $480,000 to service organizations dedicated to direct outreach with victims of human trafficking and community members who struggle with addiction. This effort supports our vision to hold buyers appropriately accountable while ensuring victims have access to the services and support they need to improve their lives. I'm proud to support the Salvation Army, Sanctuary Night, One Divine Line 2 Health, She Has a Name, and Out of Darkness as they provide life-saving services to victims and survivors. As we continue to reimagine how we promote safety in our neighborhoods, these safe spaces will provide a respite to those in crisis. Before I conclude my remarks, I'd like to thank Council President Hardin and my council colleagues for their commitment to safe and equitable neighborhoods. For our city to truly be America's opportunity city, safety must be the foundation on which we build. This goal is attainable, but will rely on all of us working together. With that, I'd like to introduce my colleague, President Pro Tem Elizabeth Brown.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much to Council President Hardin and Safety Chair Brown for convening us here. You know, COVID has really blown open the cracks that existed already in the foundation of our society. I think the question now, the charge for policymakers, is do we paper over those cracks in the foundation, or do we get serious about really solving the structural damage that has existed in those systems for a long, long time? That's really relevant to what we're talking about here, because the lack of trust in communities, especially Black and brown communities, between Black and brown communities and police, that lack of trust is not new. So are we going to get serious about solving the structural damage? We must do everything we can to assure our residents that the peace officers we employ are there to keep every family in every neighborhood safe. The actions that I'm pursuing to further demilitarize police presence are a step toward establishing greater trust. They're a step towards that long-term work, not to paper over cracks in the systems, but to get serious about addressing structural damage. These reforms take a page right out of the 21st century policing playbook, which was put forth by President Obama's administration. It's a comprehensive set of recommendations developed by government leaders, community members, law enforcement, and other key stakeholders. Demilitarization appears in our agenda just before the recommendation for civilian review boards, which is no coincidence. Both are key to supporting public trust in the police. The increasing militarization in policing, which has occurred over decades, has eroded trust and led to officers on our streets with an appearance that conflicts with their charge, which is to protect and serve. That was glaringly apparent during the police response to protests in our city and across this country last summer, which further damaged public trust in law enforcement. But it's important to emphasize that this is an issue that must be addressed every day and in every neighborhood. Police should never look or feel like an occupying force on our streets. Our best strategy, whether during protests or throughout the year, is to ensure our officers' appearance, their dress, their equipment, their tactics, conveys to residents that they're there to be guardians of the peace. And that is why we're moving forward on demilitarization legislation that will prohibit the use of control agents and specialty impact munitions against nonviolent protesters, codify that officers complete the necessary training before using devices that launch chemical agents or specialty impact munitions, require the immediate disposal of any expired chemical agents so that they may not be used, limit the use of automatic and semi-automatic rifles to responding to critical incidents such as active shooter situations, and put an end to needless displays of force before residents. And then limit the division's use of some of its most militaristic equipment, such as wheeled armored vehicles, wheeled tactical vehicles, explosives, and control agent launching devices to its tactical units like SWAT. This legislation will also require an annual report from the Chief of Police to Council and the Civilian Review Board on the use of all regulated equipment and any associated complaints. A primary effort in addressing police presence in our neighborhoods throughout the year is also an ongoing focus on the helicopter fleet and its operation. During our public hearings, the use of police helicopters in our neighborhoods was described as disruptive and unwanted by some. So we want to craft policy that allows helicopters to be used as the important law enforcement tool they are when they are needed, while also minimizing the disturbance they cause in our neighborhoods as much as possible. Some of these priorities I'm laying out here were reinforced by Judge Algernon Marbley in his recent injunction prohibiting the use of certain tactics and control agents and other equipment against nonviolent protesters. I support his ruling, and I will be seeking to codify the standard he sets for protecting First Amendment rights for our residents. Judge Marbley opened his opinion with a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and it goes like this: "But somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly, somewhere I read of the freedom of speech, somewhere I read of the freedom of press, somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest for rights." So let's be clear, the answer to preventing clashes between officers and protesters is to keep this value at the core of what we pursue. It is not, as the state legislature would have it, to infringe on sacred First Amendment rights. Instead of focusing, as they have introduced in a recent bill, instead of focusing on prosecuting protesters, let's prioritize tactics that don't unnecessarily put riot gear-clad officers toe-to-toe with the public in the first place. I am proud to be supporting these initiatives, to be pursuing them, advancing them, and supporting the work of my colleagues, because I do believe that doing whatever we can to establish trust is important to establishing and finding a greater public safety. I will just tell you, thinking about the importance of public safety, I forgive the personal story, but I have 3 kids. I have a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 6-month-old. And the 3-year-old and the 5-year-old are constantly crazy, right? They're like running all over the place, and I'm just trying to hang on for dear life sometimes. But what's really bad is when they do something dangerous, right? What makes me yell at them is if they get too close to the street. What makes me yell at them is when my 3-year-old tries to jump off the side of our house. Yes, it has happened. And I yell, and I get upset. And I feel bad about that. And afterwards, I talk to them and I say, I am sorry I yelled, but what is my number one job? What is my number one job? And they say, okay, mommy, your number one job is to keep us safe. They know the answer every time I ask them, what is my number one job? And they know the reason that's my number one job is we can't do anything else as a family. They can't do anything fun. They can't do anything interesting. They can't grow and be the people they want to be unless we keep them safe first. And that is why safety is our absolute top priority. If we want to help residents find living wage jobs, if we want to help residents care for their children, have dignified roofs over their heads, do anything else that's critical in the public policy making sphere, the first thing we have to do is keep everyone safe. That's why we're here today, and that's why these topics are so important. I would like to introduce my colleague and friend, Councilmember Rob Dorans.
Thank you, President Pro Tem Brown. I want to thank Council President Hardin and my colleagues for being here this morning. It's wonderful to be in this rec center this morning. It's a great example of what we can do as a community, not only to bring recreation opportunities for young folks, but also to provide for sustainable job opportunities. This facility was built under a community benefit agreement to make sure that the folks that worked on this project, had access to health care, retirement, and pension and training benefits, and it certainly stands as a jewel to our community and the folks that built this, and certainly took those wages back to their families. So excellent to be here this morning. I think it's very appropriate for us to be having this press conference here. As Council President Hardin mentioned, we stood in front of the community nearly a year ago to announce a variety of different topics on reimagining public safety. I announced that we'd be putting forward legislation to put a city charter amendment on the ballot to create a civilian review board for the city of Columbus. We knew that for many in our community, trust was broken between law enforcement and themselves. We knew that the ability to have transparency and accountability in the disciplinary process was a key element of this lack of trust between the community and law enforcement. The idea of a civilian review board was not new. Faith and community leaders have championed this idea for many years. The Community Safety Advisory Commission, in the report in January of 2020, recommended that the city take steps to adopt a civilian review board. Council understood clearly that if we as a community were going to come back together and establish the trust that we need between our police officers and residents, especially a trust that is incredibly important right now to combat the violence that we're seeing in our neighborhoods, that a civilian review board was an important step in this process. After countless hours of meetings with national experts, community leaders, numerous public hearings, consultation with the city attorney's office, the mayor's office, Council passed legislation on July 27th of 2020 to put a charter amendment to voters to decide whether or not we as a city should create such a body. I said that day, and I'll say it again today, it was important to me that the foundation of the Civilian Review Board be enshrined in our city's charter, our city's constitution, to make sure that no future council, no future mayor could disband or defund this body without seeking the input of voters. The people of Columbus agreed and overwhelmingly supported the charter amendment with 74% of the vote. With any new civic institution, especially one as important as the Civilian Review Board, we knew that there would be more work to do after last November's election. On April 26th of this year, 11 members of this body were appointed by the mayor and council. I want to add to my thanks to these 11 citizens that have stepped forward during a time of great need to help build a body that is transparent and puts fairness for both residents and officers at the heart of what they do. I want to extend a special thanks to Chair Janet Jackson, who has yet again stepped forward to serve the people of Columbus, just as she has done nearly her entire career. The next step in this process for council is to work with the Civilian Review Board members, the mayor's office, the city attorney, and the public on legislation to help establish the powers and responsibilities of the board outside of the foundations that were laid within the charter amendment itself, spelling out exactly the type of investigations the board will conduct and how those investigations will work with the independent inspector general is key towards making sure that we have the legal authority in place to make sure this body is effective, transparent, and does the will of the people. The task of the Civilian Review Board is great, and the community has rightfully very high expectations. That is why, again, it's so important to make sure we have the right legislation in place to make sure these efforts and the members themselves are supported as they embark on this incredibly important task. City Council will be holding a public hearing this upcoming Tuesday, July 6th at 5 p.m. in Council chambers to discuss this legislation. I invite the members of the public of all perspectives to engage with us on this legislation. If we're truly going to build trust between residents and law enforcement, we need to have a tough conversation and ensure we have the legal foundation in place that is fair and transparent for everyone. It is my goal that Council will pass this legislation on Monday, July 12th, and the Civilian Review Board will be ready to take up this monumental task and begin its operations formally. This will mark a new era for the City of Columbus, one of which I am hopeful that will bring us all closer to rebuilding that trust between residents and law enforcement that everyone desires, and continue the goal of this council and this city and its residents of keeping every single neighborhood safe. So we are excited about this work. We think it's going to be a key element of reimagining public safety, ensuring that we're supporting folks in our community and the transparency that they desire. With that, I'd like to introduce my friend and colleague, Councilmember Shayla Faber.
Thank you, Councilmember Dorans, and good morning to everyone joining us here today. I first want to extend my gratitude to each of my colleagues for their continued dedication to this critical work. Just over a year ago, we laid the foundation for our Reimagining Public Safety work. And since that time, we've made great strides. We've invited the community to weigh in on our budgeting process and what they need to feel safe. We passed important legislation that laid the foundation for continued conversations around safety, including banning hate group affiliations in the police, an effort that I led last year. And we've supported community-based organizations through grant funding in their individual efforts to support safety across the city. I continue to believe that the path of reinvesting resources directly into the community is the best path forward. But also in the past year, our community has continued to contend with unprecedented violence in our city, particularly amongst our young people. And we have also grieved the loss of life in our community at the hands of law enforcement. This is why it is so important for us to be here today, reaffirming our commitment to this work. Just 2 months ago, Columbus made national headlines when 16-year-old Ma'Khia Bryant was shot and killed by a Columbus police officer. I continue to hold Ma'Khia's family and friends in my prayers, as well as all of the community members who have reached out to our offices demanding justice and asking what more can be done to prevent these tragic events. We also continue to hold Casey Goodson Jr., Andre Hill, and their families and friends in our hearts. When these incidents occur, we erase so much of the work that we've done to build trust between the community and our police officers. Trust is at the foundation of how members of our community interacting with police feel safe in Columbus. That's why it's critical that we continue to consider exhausting alternatives to lethal force and ensure transparency in use of force reporting. In the coming weeks, I will be taking a closer look at use of force directives, specifically focusing on exhausting alternatives to lethal force and ensuring comprehensive reporting for use of force. Our goal is to develop policies that will protect both our residents and our officers. we want to ensure everyone involved in an interaction has the opportunity to make it home safely to their families. I know that our police department has already begun significant work in this area, and I look forward to the opportunity to collaborate with our new chief and her designees in this continued work. I understand that these are not easy topics to figure out, but I do know that with community will and partnership with our officers, we can achieve results that we all want to see. Thank you, Council President Hardin and Public Safety Chair Brown, for your leadership on all these efforts. I look forward to working with all of my colleagues, as well as members of our community, to ensure this important work continues. With that, I'd like to introduce my friend and colleague, Councilmember Emmanuel Remy.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Faber, and thank you to my colleagues, Council President Hardin, and all of our team for the work that they've done to get us here today. Adding on to what my colleague was saying, we also need officers to have an obligation, an active obligation, to step in when they see something wrong. This is why I think it is important to establish a policy for our officers to have a duty to intervene, and to also have protections when doing so. A widely known example that we should all be familiar with at this point is the preventable death of Mr. George Floyd. A police officer putting their knee in someone's neck for nearly 9 minutes is and was already against the law. The dereliction of duty leading to the death of Mr. Floyd was an officer whose name shall not be said here today, abusing his authority and a failure to intervene by the other police officers on the scene. This has led to many cities around the United States legislating laws such as Carroll's Law out of Buffalo, New York, the duty to intervene. In Columbus, it is important that we do all we can to protect our residents. This includes our officers being mandated to intervene during any unnecessary use of force or abuses by fellow officers. There shall be no thin line between police officers doing their job and abusing their authority. I also believe that it is equally important that our officers feel safe when practicing their duty to intervene. We want to be responsible and protect our fine officers who comply with these directives by putting rules in place that will mitigate any occurrences of retaliation, abuse, or unfair treatment. In addition to protecting officers who comply with this new law, we also want to make sure officers who abuse their power and make the days and jobs of their peers harder to be reprimanded. We are hopeful that the duty of intervene will never be necessary, but in the event it is, we want a policy in place to address the situation. As chair of the Administration Committee, which includes Human Resources and Civil Service, another challenge I'm working to address is diversity in the City of Columbus workforce, including the Division of Police. During my tenure as a neighborhood leader in the Northland community, I engaged with residents from many walks of life, including our new American, immigrant, and refugee communities. It's no secret that many of our communities of color face many challenges when engaging with police officers. Now, there are many reasons for this, but what I want to focus on this morning is our officers' ability to relate to our communities of color. Many of our officers do not come from the communities they police, let alone live in the communities they police. And this can be addressed. Meanwhile, many of our new American immigrant or refugee communities face challenges such as access to basic city services, including safety services. Some residents with limited English proficiencies have had to learn to lean on their children and sometimes even their aggressors to translate for them during emergency medical situations. There have also been occurrences where residents with learning LEP, sorry about that, limited English proficiencies have dialed 911 and had to wait for up to 20 minutes for a translator. I believe we can address these challenges by working to build a City of Columbus employee workforce that is reflective of the community in which it serves. Engaging and educating our community on employment opportunities with the city is a start to achieving this goal. Evaluating the civil service process and removing barriers that limit diversity will be a major step in having a more inclusive workforce that is better prepared to serve every resident of Columbus, especially as it relates to public safety. This means that we need to reform civil service. This will not be a quick effort. It may even require going to the voters. Today is a new day. I've had the pleasure to work with this new chief almost daily since her hiring was announced. I've wanted her to know beyond any doubt that myself and this council stands by her side to lift her up in her initiatives to reform this division of police, to meet the expectations of the community. Unlike last year, where cooperation within the division barely existed, this chief stands ready to stand shoulder to shoulder to support our men and women doing the work and to support the directives of our community to deploy a community-focused police department and for the directive that our residents and taxpayers feel safe. I want to thank my colleagues once again for their support, for the work that's been announced here today, and I certainly want to thank Council President, and I'll turn the floor back over to him.
Thank you, Councilman Marimi, and thank you to all of my colleagues. As you can see, this council stands united on our path to keep our neighborhood safe, to continue our reform policies, and to build trust. While Councilmember Tyson isn't here in person, she has been tremendously committed to this effort. Her work to create the Black Girls Commission and breathe life into a critical conversation about how we support our young girls has been so important. She recently announced a new partnership with OSU College of Social Work. The College of the Juvenile Courts will lead a mindfulness-based stress reduction program for Black girls aimed to promote restoration and healing, reducing the potential for law-breaking behavior. She's helping to paint an innovative vision for supporting young girls, and we owe her our thanks for that work. As we advance the idea of reimagining safety, I said over and over again that alternative crisis response is my top priority. I'm excited to see the mayor and the administration begin to run with that ball. Now is the time to stack hands and collaborate about what the new system can look like for the future. I don't claim to have all the answers, and that's why we need subject matter experts engaged, residents rolling up their sleeves to help shape what this alternative crisis response system looks like. I'll be working with the administration and advocates to sketch out how we can bring those much needed voices to the table as we build out what the alternative crisis response looks like in Columbus. We also need to heal the trust that has been broken within our communities. As life begins to return to normal and the days become warmer, a lack of trust is at the center of many critical issues. Whether we're talking about gun violence or the decision to call the police, trust is key. And the lack of trust leads folks to feel unsafe in their own community. Council will set aside $100,000 to begin a process of healing within the community. Working with outside grant makers, our community organizations will receive funds to facilitate wellness and trauma-informed conversations, educate the greater community on racial equity, and reconnect neighbors to neighbors and neighbors with peace officers. Council will look to peer cities and models from national organizations. Our hope is to get folks out of their homes and out of their corners to a shared table to recognize one another's humanity and our shared commitment to our community. Today, Council laid out a lengthy set of safety initiatives. This package sets up the next several months of our work. Some elements will pass in July, while others will pass this fall. But Council is committed to moving policy and legislation to help folks feel safe in their neighborhoods, to continue reform, and to build trust. With that, we want to thank you for attending. We will open it up to my colleagues for one-on-one interviews with anybody. We'll stick around to make sure that we can do those one-on-one interviews. Thank you and have a great day.